Hello, hope you got an interesting session on communication. But that's not the end. You have just went to the first steps. You have just stepped on the preliminary ground steps in communication. Here onwards we have lot of such classifications, lot of contents to deal with. I told you some time before itself, in unit for communication, we have a wide variety of things to talk about. We have elements of communication, which we have discussed a while ago. We have types of communication to talk about, which is like 10, 20 types you can just code about, talk about. And where we apply all these types in communication, what kind of classification they hold on to. Lot of such questions come to our mind. Lot of such scientific classifications are designed in order to define the communication process, which we will definitely come up with. Today, I am talking to you about the kind of context in which we undertake a communication process. Do you have any idea what context is all about? Let me tell you. Where are you now? At your home? Or at your college? Or at your friend's home? Anywhere you be, how you talk to the person next to you at this particular moment? I know many of you are preparing for your exams deliberately at many parts of the country, even between your work hours. Some of you might be in your reading room. Some of you might be at the library hall in your college with your headsets on to hear my classes. Or some of you might be at some other work at your homes, maybe your household works. And in between you are just hearing this video, right? So, to the people out here, let me ask you, is that the same way that every one of you is going to communicate with the person sitting or standing next to you at this particular point of time? One at the library, I am asking you, how you are going to talk to the person next to you at this moment? Whispering sound, right? Very low inland murmuring sounds, right? The one near a road who is with his headsets on, trying to hear the class in between the empty hours you have just got now. How you are going to talk to the person sitting on the next shop? Are you going to murmur something? No, you are going to speak aloud, right? And the one at your household, how you are going to ask your parent or your partner or who sitting in the hall or the drawing room to take the better headset so that you can hear it more clearly, to take your Bluetooth headset so that you can hear the video along with your work. You are going to shout at the person, right? Or you are going to modify your communication, modify your diction, the words that you might use. All these things that we will talk about in the context in communication. There are different types of contexts in communication where we modify our message based on the place or the situation in which we undertake this communication process, which we will talk about in context classification. Types of context. Let me tell you with the most familiar things that you might know. What is context? What are the different types of context that you need to talk about? First things first, physical context. I was asking you, where are you all these people at this point of time, at this moment of time, hearing my video? And you just told me some places, right? Place. That is what that comes under physical context. The place of your communication that can determine the way you communicate to the other person. It comes under physical context. So this place determines your way of interaction, how much loudness you should undertake, how loud you can speak, what kind of words you can speak. All comes under place of communication. Okay, the place determines our way of interaction. I have given you an example right here. The difference in way in interaction in a DJ night is different from the way you interact in a conference hall. In a conference hall, you are supposed to stay silent because the other person is speaking. Okay, so you have to communicate something important to the other person sitting next to you. Okay, so there you keep a decorum. But is that the way you communicate in a DJ night? There you have to shout out, right? Then only the other person will be able to hear. You all will be cheering. So is that the very same kind of method or the very same kind of communication that you might indulge in both these places? No. That is where physical context comes into play. The way you communicate to the other person is determined by the place of your interaction. That is physical context. Then comes historical context. Historical context, just like the name suggests, your previous historical experience with a person or a situation can be a part of the modifications in your communication. I'll tell you, if you have an experience with a person or a situation, for example, a doctor, that doctor might have lot of experience with lot of symptoms, so the doctor can easily identify, okay, these kinds of symptoms comes when this patient is having this kind of disease. How the doctor was able to identify that? Because the doctor might have seen such kinds of patients for a long time in his lifetime. So his lifetime experiences with a situation made him make a decision. Similarly, in a communication process, if we have an experience with a person or a situation in your lifetime, you will definitely modify the message. You know what this person can understand, to how much extent this person can grasp things, how this person will interrupt or interpret your ways of communication or the things that you might say. All these things will definitely make us modify the message, and we will definitely have expectations. If we are aware of the historical context or if we are having previous experiences with the person, we have certain expectations that how this person might react to us if they hear a particular thing. So this is what historical context is all about. Our previous experiences help us modify a piece of information or deal with a communication process. That is why when you apply for your jobs, companies seek for your experience. Why? Because you can better handle the situation in such a manner. That is what historical context is all about. Next, we'll talk about social context. Social context is the relationship between the sender and the receiver. Okay, it can determine our way of communication. If the sender or the encoder is having a healthy relationship with the receiver, very close, very intimate bondage with the receiver, they can speak anything. Okay, or the way they communicate is different. If that might not be the case between a speaker and a receiver who might not be sharing enough bondages, or they might be strangers, the way of communication is different. Our way of communication is different. For example, if you are talking to your parents, how do you behave? Yeah, we are free, we know them well, they are our parents, so we have a sense of freedom. So we will talk to them in a more free manner. But is that the case with a stranger or your school, college principal or your boss or the head of your employees team, anything? There you might not be that free just as you are with your parents sometimes, or your intimate ones, anyone be. Okay, not only parents, anyone whom you are so close with. There your way of communication is different. But and depending upon the person or the situation, we often modify the message. So that is social context, because the social status or the social roles of a person, the social norms sometimes, they all determine the way we should communicate to a person. That is called social context. And so we have talked about physical context where place determines the way of communication or interaction. We have talked about historical context where our past experiences can help us modify our message. And now social context, that is the social roles, social norms, status, everything that determines our way of communication, which comes under social context, which is the third classification in the context with regard to communication. So, I hope you got that idea about social context, the ways in which we modify our messages based on the social situations and the social roles that we play that make us sometimes tempt us to modify our message. Now, we'll talk about the next factor that make us modify the message. Wait a second. It's about psychological context. Psychological context. As I told you, the social roles can sometimes determine our ways of communication. Similarly, our emotional bondage with a person, even if the social roles are satisfied, our emotional bondage can also play a major role. How we talk to a person or how we deal with that particular person. Despite of all the social roles or despite of all the roles that he or that other person is having with our lives. Okay, what society talks about how the other person should behave to us, despite of all such social norms, we ourselves will have a value system, okay, in the ways which we communicate to the other person. That is where psychological context comes into play. The way we are bonded to that particular person, is that a formal bondage or a friendly bond? That can determine our way of communication. The extent of formality and friendliness that we have with the other person can sometimes determine our way of communication. That is where psychological context come into play. So here our moods and our emotions do matter in order to perceive a message, in order to respond to a message, the way we respond, the way we modify our communication process, all these come under psychological context. Okay, so imagine if you are in a classroom where a teacher is right here to praise their students. Okay, that time she will be so elaborate, and that time she will encourage a lot of questions as well. Okay, so we can communicate more freely to the teacher if that teacher is praising you for something you have did better. But imagine that teacher is scolding you. Will you be able to communicate properly to the teacher, or will you use the same kinds of words that you might use when the teacher is happy? No, we will be so cautious. Okay, we will be so cautious in dealing with the person, and we will be modifying our message according to the psychological context. Or if the other person, if we are so comfortable with, we will use some carefree words sometimes, or we will be so free to act. But if the other person, if we are not so comfortable with, the words that we will use will be different. So that's about psychological context. Next, cultural context. Cultural context means the cultural implications, like the value systems, ethics, morals, beliefs, everything can determine our way of communication. Okay, so it can affect our communication to a large extent. Why? Because in certain cultural backgrounds, we are not supposed to speak certain words. We are not supposed to speak in certain manners. There we modify our message, right? So in certain communities, the certain people cannot speak directly to the head of the community, or their beliefs might not let the other person. I have seen in certain communities, especially in tribal communities, if a newborn baby is there in a family, you cannot, the other children of the family cannot step into the house where the mother resides. The mother is having other children as well. So such cultural contexts or beliefs, value systems can sometimes resist us, or sometimes make us modify our message, because some people cannot easily relate with some of the examples you might tell. Okay, so cultural context is all about the cultural implications, the signs, symbols, everything that we use should be based on the cultural implications that we have or the cultural backgrounds that we possess or the other person possess, which make us modify the message, which we talk about in cultural context. Okay, so the norms, ideas, social status, everything, and even our historical experiences and the physical place, all these things might let us to modify our message in the communication process, which we can talk about, which we could talk about in the classification of context with regard to communication. Want to know more about communication? Stay tuned and join us for the full course of NTA UG SNET Paper 1 soon.